Well, Kyle, I can't believe Lena Winslow they did it. It was a back-to-back win. They've got 5. Oh, just kidding. We didn't have any football this year.
No, but what we have is state championship week in an odd format, being that
there is none.
There is no state championship, and we're at that time of the season. Unfortunately, COVID has derailed the season that we were going to have.
Well, at least we don't know what the spring will bring.
Correct.
I didn't mean to rhyme, but we didn't have our typical fall football.
So with that, we decided to come up with something different. This was Kari's idea. We wanted to give you guys a slate of games to watch Class 1A through 4A for Friday's state championship game day. That way you can at least experience some normalcy on what is typically our state championship coverage week.
So obviously we've had so many great NUIC teams go down to state. But unfortunately, well, I shouldn't say unfortunately, if you love a good blowout in favor of your hometown team, you know, that's one thing. That's me. But we wanted to bring you the best games. I mean, down to the wire, coming back from deficits, looking out for the underdog. So we don't have, if you want a blowout, just go YouTube, look up that game yourself. But if you want a good, like, nail biter,
something that's going to get you off the seat of the couch and it brings you that excitement. Those are the exact games that we have chosen. Kari has come up with 3 games for each class, and I've put in a 4th game for each class to give us a quadruple header so you guys have the opportunity to pick which games you want to watch. And we're going to put them out on our social media sites at the exact same time frames that they would have been played at the state championship game. So 10 o'clock for 1A, 1 o'clock for 2A, 4 o'clock for 3A, and 7 o'clock for 4A. So it brings you to that normalcy once again.
And obviously, since you're getting a bunch of different games, we would love for you to drop down in the comments and let us know what you're what you are mixing and matching for your viewership on Friday.
That's a great idea.
Are you ready to get into this?
I am.
All right, let's go. Well, if I'm going to sound biased, I might as well sound biased right out the gates, right? My number 1 pick for the Class 1A game is the 2017 title game between Lena Winslow and TUSCOLA. Obviously, I sound like a huge homer, but let me lay this out for you. I am going to make the argument, if you want to disagree, I say okay. If I'm going to pick a team that was the team of the decade, I would argue that it's going to be Lena Winslow, based on the fact that they did accomplish the feat of 4 state championships in a 10-year span. I do think it all harkens all the way back to the 2006 season. Obviously, I know we constantly go back and forth with Lena Winslow. They don't rebuild, they reload. And the 06 season was their first undefeated season until they met their match in Morrison. 2009, they ended up having their first semifinal appearance with a loss to Lexington, and then they managed to make it to state in 2010, and then here we are today. So to go all the way back to the game now, bring it all full span, full circle, Lena Winslow met TUSCOLA in 2010 and beat them, but that was a blowout, so we're going to toss that game out, right? So I know you're going to talk to any Lena Winslow fan, and they're going to tell you this 2017 game, you were on the edge of your seat. I can't tell you, standing on the sidelines, standing with past coaches and past teachers, I mean, I know, you know, the nerves were flowing.
Yeah, I mean, you had a great atmosphere, 2 teams coming in undefeated, ranked number 1 and number 2 in state. Obviously, the second time they'd met each other. This was Lena Winslow's 3rd trip to the state championship game, TUSCOLA's 6th trip to the state championship game. And, you know, when you look at what this game brought, you had to 5 potential Division I athletes on this field between both teams. And you could argue that there was a 6th one in there as well, based off of opportunities, looks, what have you in that. But just the excitement level for this game in itself, when you began the season, you could have picked 4 teams, which we did. We had 4 teams pegged right from the start of the season, and we stated these 4 teams are the 4 teams to watch. And lo and behold, those 4 teams were the teams that made it to the semifinal match. And these 2 teams came out on top and to bring it all on the carpet at NIU.
There was a lot of black and gold at that game, that's for sure.
So, obviously, with the game itself, TUSCOLA would get on the board first, taking a 7-0 lead with 4 minutes and 16 seconds left in the first quarter. And then a short time later, with a minute left, Lena Winslow would answer to make it 7-all. In the second quarter, it looked like Lena Winslow was going to put the brakes on TUSCOLA and start to run away with the game as they pulled out to a 21-7 lead after a 76-yard and 22-yard touchdown runs. But when you entered the third quarter, TUSCOLA brought a different resolve with them as they put up 2 scores in the third quarter to make it 21-20. And that last score, there was a botched snap on the extra point, which ultimately became the deciding factor in the game in favor of Lena Winslow. But when you take a look at how the fourth quarter transpired, there's a lot of moments in that fourth quarter that left you on the edge of your seat, wondering which way the game was going to go.
Yeah, whether the last timeout was going to get taken or what have you. So that's why that was my pick. Hopefully you guys agree, and I'm looking forward to what you guys all pick to watch. So for my second game, I chose the Class 1A title matchup from 1989 featuring the Orangeville Broncos and the Lexington Minutemen. I saw the logo in my head, couldn't remember what they were. Excuse me about that. Anyway, so what's so cool about this matchup is that both I don't know why I'm looking at you like you don't know. Orangeville and Lexington both had made it to the semifinals the year before in the 1988 season. So they both had something that they had to prove.
Yes. With that, Orangeville came in with an 11-2 record. They had a tough schedule going through the old NWIC conference, where Lexington was undefeated. I believe in that year they were the #1 ranked team as well. Both teams obviously bringing back a lot of returning talent, which got them to the semifinals the year before, and here they were in 1989 at ISU for the state championship game. With that, Orangeville opened up the game first with the score in the first quarter to take an 8-0 lead, but Lexington would take over from there as they would build a 15-8 lead with 5 minutes left in the first half. And then they would get one more score to take a 22-8 lead entering the half. In the third quarter, Orangeville would respond. Their first possession of the third quarter led to a touchdown and a 2-point conversion, which cut the deficit to 22-16 with 8:57 to go in the third quarter. But Lexington would increase that lead once again to 29-16 with 2 minutes remaining in the third quarter, which would actually be the lead as they entered the final stanza in the fourth quarter. Orangeville would respond big time in the fourth quarter. It started off with the touchdown with 11:9 remaining to cut the lead to 29-24. Then, with 5 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, Orangeville would take a lead 30-29 on a touchdown run, and then on the very next possession, they would return an interception 41 yards to take a final lead 36-29, which would actually propel them to their first state championship, and to this date, only state championship, which obviously was a very exciting time for Orangeville, the town, the community, the players. It's something that they still pride themselves on today. As you go into Orangeville, you still see the Bronco at the front of the school in the 1989 Class 1A state championships. And for me, that's really cool. Obviously, this was a great game to beat down 2 scores, almost pretty much 3 scores. Well, it was 2 scores, but down 2 scores, come back with 3 scores in the 4th quarter to win that title. So, very good call on this game, for sure.
So, for the 3rd game, we have a double overtime thriller between the Galena Pirates and the LEROY Panthers for your 2003 state championship. So, this game, while we've been very fortunate, knock on wood, the last few years, weather has never been an issue. Can't say the same for this one. This one, it was a major slop fest with nice little flurries for the first half and basically just huge snow, well, not a snowstorm, but, you know, close enough for the second half.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you had a second half where you saw a lot of snow accumulation start to build up on the field, creating a lot of slipperiness on the surface as well. Obviously, this game was played in the low 30s, high 20s. So it was a cooler game, but not too cold. But at the same time, just the right climate to get all that snow and precipitation buildup. But what you had here was Galena entering the state championship game as the first ever 6-3 team in Class 1A to make the state finals.
But let's also talk about, I know we've talked about this with you guys 100 times, but the NUIC, as we refer to it now, the gauntlet, you know, to be 6-3 coming out of our conference, that's still huge.
It is, but at the same time, you know, this was a time frame where you didn't see a lot of 6-3s that made it very far. We'd seen it in 1999 with DAKOTA and Milledgeville both getting to the semifinals, but until Galena broke through at the state championship appearance, it really wasn't something that you saw on the normal level. And obviously, as we broke into the 8-class system in 2001, you started to see it happen more and more as time went on. But Galena was the first one to do it in Class 1A. They were taking on LEROY, who was ranked #1 in state from start to finish. They were coming off of a state runner-up appearance in Class 3A just 2 years prior to that, and they were there in 1996 as the Class 2A state champion, whereas Galena had won state in 97 and were runner-up in 99, both in Class 1A. So here we are, 2003, with this exciting matchup. LEROY 13-0, Galena having to beat 4 top 10 teams in order to win the state championship game. LEROY scored first 7-0 with 2:19 remaining in the first quarter. Galena would respond in the second quarter with 3:13 left before halftime to make it a 7-7 tie. That tie would hold up until overtime. And in the first overtime, it was LEROY who would take the lead on the first series. Galena tied it up at 14-14. Then in the second overtime, Galena got the ball first. They end up scoring on a 4th and 1 to get the touchdown. They kicked the extra point to take the 21-14 lead. LEROY tied it up, or scored, did not tie it up. LEROY scored to make it 21-20 on a 3rd and goal. And their extra point attempt went wide left to allow Galena to win in what would become Coach Cordy's final game for the Galena Pirates as head coach as well. It also introduced Ed Freed as the new head coach for Galena, as they were co-head coach that year. All right, our fourth Class 1A state championship game selection is a game that I picked, and it's a game that still stands very vivid in my mind to this day, and that is the 1998 state championship game between the Carthage Blue Boys and the Newman Comets. Carthage entered the game ranked number 1. Newman was 12-1 that year. They were ranked in the top 10 in state, but they weren't the number 1 team. They did beat the number 2 ranked team that year to get to the state championships. That was the GLENA Pirates, who they upset in the quarterfinals 17-14. GLENA was obviously undefeated that year, ranked number 2 right behind Carthage. And then Carthage had to not upset, but they beat the number 4 ranked Milledgeville Missiles in the semifinals to make their appearance at state. Milledgeville was the number 1 seeded team that year as well.
Now, if I might be mistaken, this was a 1 through 32 seeded matchup, was it not?
Yes, it was.
So that makes it a little interesting too.
It was very interesting.
That sort of.
It was great. I missed the 1 through 32s. If you look back at the whole 1 through 32 series for the 5 years that the IHSA had it play out, or 6 seasons, I think it was. Yeah, 6. The 1 through 32 matchup led to a lot of great state championship games. There weren't too many blowouts in that time frame.
No, because you had the true number 1 and true number 2 versus number 1 and, the South versus the North, which again, we've talked about with you guys countless times.
Well, you really had to earn it to get there. There was only 6 classes instead of 8, so you didn't have a 256 team field. You were a lot lower than you had under 200 schools making the playoffs at that time. So to get to state was a great thing, but you had teams that are now considered 2A that were 1A then, and likewise, you had teams that are now 3A that were 2A then, like Stillman Valley was a premier 2A team back in this time frame, and now they're 3A and sometimes pushing 4A. So
before you get into your game of why you picked it, sorry guys, we're delaying. But anyway, you played that Carthage team.
Yes.
And then you watched that Newman team twice?
Yes.
Do you feel that this was the state matchup that year?
I do. I think that the top 4 teams that year were definitely Carthage, Newman, Milledgeville, and Galena. There's no doubt in my mind. Out of those 4 teams, I did play 3 of them, playing Galena, Milledgeville, and Carthage. And likewise, those 4 teams, I mean, you look at their games, the biggest game was Carthage's win over Milledgeville was 30-14. That was the biggest deficit. But looking at this game, it was a great one. Carthage obviously took the early 6-0 lead with 7 minutes and 47 seconds to go in the first quarter. They would carry that lead into the second quarter, but Newman would tie it up with 9 minutes and 19 seconds remaining in the first half. Then Newman took the lead 13-6 with 4:06 remaining in the half, and that was the halftime score. Coming out into the third quarter, Carthage wasted no time taking the lead 14-13, just 49 seconds into the third quarter on a big run. But Newman would take it back 19-14 with 5:33 left in the game, or in the third quarter, and then opened it up to 26-14 with 10:35 remaining in the contest. And at that point, I really thought that, wow, Newman's going to win another state title. But Carthage would respond with 8:04 remaining in the game. They cut the lead to 26-22. And then they would take the lead for good with 50 seconds remaining on what was their 20th pass completion of the year for a big pass play to win the state championship 30-26. Ultimately, that would propel Carthage on to their first of 3 straight state titles and their first of 6 state championship game appearances in 7 seasons as well. So quite the run for the Blue Boys at that time.
Are you ready for Class 2A?
I'm ready. Are you ready?
I hope so. So, for my number 1 pick for the Class 2A matchup is the 2005 state championship game between the Dakota Indians and the ALEDO Dragons. I remember this was back when I was in school, y'all. Dakota was a team to be reckoned with. I mean, there was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This is Dakota's first state appearance, and what makes this game so intriguing, it was a completely scoreless first quarter.
It was. You really didn't start seeing scoring until immediately into the second quarter when ALEDO took an 8-0 lead just 5 seconds into the second quarter. But Dakota would respond later on with 8 minutes to go to make it 8-6. They failed on the 2-point try. And that score would remain the same in favor of ALEDO at the half. In the third quarter, Dakota would come out late and take a 20-8 lead into the fourth quarter. They scored twice there in the third quarter to take that 20-8 lead. But ALEDO would come back with a little over 4 minutes to go to cut that deficit to 20-15. And if you remember in that game, or at that time, ALEDO was very pass happy. They had a very explosive offense. In fact, this ALEDO team was junior-led. It was not senior-led like you normally see in state championship type matchups. And a lot of these players for ALEDO would return the following year to get back to the state championship game as well. But they didn't have enough firepower to get past Dakota that day. The last 4 minutes were an exciting time. Dakota came away with the victory 20-15 in their first ever trip to state. But as you alluded to before, you know, coming out of the NUIC, you're geared for big games. At this time, it was still early on. Obviously, we knew our conference was tough. Dakota was making the 6th conference appearance at state in the past 9 seasons. Earlier in that day, Freeport-Acwin had won the title for the NUIC against Cambridge, which was another fantastic game. Easily a game that could have fallen onto our 1A list, but unfortunately it didn't make the cut. Obviously, we had some great 1A games, but you know, Dakota really came through. They solidified what the NUIC is, and I think it was really at that time you started to see Dakota take the reins over from GALENA, and this is the time frame where you started to see things start to shift in favor more explosively across the state for the NUIC as it started to, you know, capitalize on what their success was. I mean, you saw a great run for Dakota, Lena Winslow, Forreston, Stockton, Acwin. They were all in there every year. And, I mean, you started to see a lot of state rankings come to the NUIC in this time frame. And a lot of it is because of this 2005 season with Acwin and Dakota both making it to state that year.
So next on my lineup for the Class 2A state championships is the 2017 matchup between the GCMS Falcons and the MAROA-FORSYTH Trojans. Obviously, we've seen these teams play a handful of times. Each time, pretty exciting, right? This one, though, this was a great game because this was GCMS's first state appearance, and MAROA was making their 7th appearance in 12 seasons.
Very much so. And when you look at it, GCMS was undefeated, 13-0. They had upset what everybody saw as the favorite in Sterling-Newman in the semifinals, 14-8. We watched them squeeze out a tough one in the second round against West Carroll. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we had taken a lot of flack from GCMS fans as our weekly videos, we were not favoring GCMS heavily. And lo and behold, you know, when they got into the big game moments, they really shined. And this game was one of them, and it really made the mark for a lot of their players. Obviously, one of their players that really shined in this game is now playing for the University of Illinois in a starting role on defense and on special teams. And on special teams, but obviously MAROA-FORSYTH has churned out quite the athletes in their time as well under Coach Joseph. So great programs, both of these. GCMS finally getting to the state championship game. In 2015, they were 1 point away from beating the eventual state champion in Arcola. It was actually the closest game that Arcola had that entire season. So just very close to getting there, never quite there, but here they were in 2017 at NIU, and right out of the gates, MAROA-FORSYTH scored with a minute and a half into the game to take an early 6-0 lead, but not to be phased. GCMS came back about 4 minutes later to score and take the lead 7-6. MAROA-FORSYTH would quickly answer about 5 minutes later to regain a 12-7 advantage heading into the second quarter. And then about just under 3 minutes into the second quarter, GCMS would take the lead, this time going for 2 to take a 15-12 lead with 9:24 remaining before half. But it was MAROA-FORSYTH scoring with 2 seconds left in the half to take that 19-15 lead into the halftime. In the third quarter, this is where we thought MAROA was going to start to open things up as they took a 26-15 lead just 3 minutes into the third quarter. But GCMS again proved that they were ready for that challenge. They came back, they scored, they cut the deficit to 26-23 with 6:25 to go. That score would remain the same entering the fourth quarter in favor of MAROA-FORSYTH. And then right away in the fourth quarter, GCMS took the lead 30-26, which was the first lead that they had since the second quarter. That left them up 30-26 with 9:13 to go in the game. At the 6:26 mark, MAROA-FORSYTH jumped out with a big 52-yard touchdown run that propelled them into that lead 32-30. And then with 1:08 remaining, that was the rollout play to the back of the end zone for the touchdown catch for GCMS that just went viral immediately across the state of Illinois as GCMS took the lead 38-32 and then held on through some desperation attempts from MAROA-FORSYTH to win their first state title, going undefeated 14-0. And man, what a great game that was.
I don't know about you, but I love a game that has a good backstory behind it. For my third pick, we're going with the 2002 matchup between ALEDO and Carthage. So keep in mind, in 2001, here's where I get to this backstory part. In 2001, ALEDO stopped Carthage in the first round of playoffs and halted them so that they would not see their fourth straight appearance at the state championship level.
Yeah, and it was quite the impressive stop. I mean, you take a look at it. ALEDO went to state that year in 2001, winning their second state title in 4 seasons. So here we are in 2002. Carthage is making their 6th state championship appearance. ALEDO is there for the second time in 4 seasons. And like you said, you got a little backstory there from the year before where they met up in the first round of the playoffs thanks to a teacher strike down in Carthage, which held them to a 6-3 record, which allowed that opportunity for the first round matchup.
So obviously coming into this game, based on the year prior and all of this other stuff, I mean, there was some revenge, I think, on the line.
Oh,
or
for sure.
Some revenge was wanted.
Oh, yes. And both teams came in undefeated at 13-0. So these were the top 2 ranked teams in state in Class 2A that year. Obviously, like we said, ALEDO coming in as the defending state champs. Carthage just recently removed from 3 straight state championship
they were removed
runs.
from their throne
and ready to go in 2002. And right away in the first quarter, well, it wasn't right away in the first quarter. It took most of the first quarter, but Carthage scored first to take a lead 6-0, and then right away in the second quarter, they upped that lead to 12-0 with 9 minutes. Just over 9 minutes to go in the second quarter. ALEDO would get on the board to make it 12-8 with 5 minutes to go, and then Carthage would score 3 seconds left in the half to take an 18-8 advantage into halftime with them. In the third quarter, it was ALEDO who came out and scored first about halfway through to cut that deficit to 18-16. But here's where it really got interesting. Carthage then went on to score 2 more times over the span of the next 4 minutes to take a commanding 34-16 lead that they would carry into the fourth quarter.
And I'm sure that they thought, this is in the bag.
It appears that they thought that way because enter the fourth quarter and here comes ALEDO. They would score at the 8-minute mark, at the 4:30 mark, and then they tied the game with 34 seconds left to make it a 34-34 score and send the game to overtime. And in overtime, Carthage got the ball first, as Carthage always did. They went for 2. They didn't get it. They had a 40-34 advantage. ALEDO scored, kicked the extra point, won the game for their 2nd straight state title. But that was a very exciting game for Dragons fans, obviously, but as a fan of the game, that was one of the best games to watch that I've seen in my time watching these games as well. All right, our 4th game of Class 2A brings us to 1996, where the LEROY Panthers squared up with the Central A&M Raiders. This was an excellent game. Obviously, 1996, this is Central A&M making their 3rd state championship appearance in 5 seasons. LEROY making their first ever state final appearance. And even though, despite the records, a lot of people saw Central A&M as the favorite in this game heading in. And likewise, Central A&M would be the first to get on the board with a 6-0 lead with 1:36 left in the first quarter. That lead would hold going into the second half, where Central A&M would increase it to 12-0 with 6:52 in the third quarter to go. They carried that 12-0 lead into the fourth quarter. And in the fourth quarter, that's when LEROY would strike. At 8:36, they scored first to cut that deficit to 14-8. And then 4 minutes later, they would score again to take a lead 16-14 that they would hold on to win their first state championship game.
So if you want a good, not slugfest, but, you won it where it was battle. I mean, I'm sure it was right there on the line. I mean,
it was a fantastic game. And, I mean, if you remember how CAM fans were chanting, CAM, CAM, that chant started back in these days here when, Central A&M, they were coming off of a runner-up appearance in 1995. They lost by 2 points that year. Here they are in 1996. They're like, yeah, we're going to get this. They lose by 2 points. Finally, in 1997, they got back there for the 3rd straight year. They won their first and only state title that year. But, you take a look at LEROY, who we've talked about in a 1A game already. And here they are winning state in 96. By 2001, they're in 3A in the state championship game, and then in 2002, they're in the state championship game in 1A. So, I mean, this was a great point for both teams. Obviously, Central A&M would get back there again in 2001, and then they didn't make it back to the state championship game until this past season when we saw them in 2019. But LEROY, after that 2003 game that we had them against Galena, they've never been back to the state championship game. So, great time for both these schools in the mid to late 90s, but obviously things change and shift, and it's good to see Central A&M rise back to the top. Obviously, we've seen Leroy a couple times over the past few years. They've had some pretty tough games, and they play in a pretty solid conference still. So, a lot of fun. This is definitely one of those games, though. It's exciting for sure.
So now we're in 3A, and I don't know about you guys, but I love a good overtime thriller when it's not my team. So when it comes to 3A, we don't really have any teams, but a team that we can claim is the Stillman Valley Cardinals. So my pick is the 2013 matchup between the Cardinals and St. Joseph Ogden Spartans. St. Joe, they were making their 5th appearance at state, and Stillman Valley was on their 6th.
Yeah, I mean, 2013, both teams entered this state championship game at 11-2, so both had 2 regular season losses. So it's safe to say when they entered the playoffs, neither one of them was really looked at as a favorite. But when you have a pedigree like St. Joe Ogden and Stillman Valley have, they're teams that you can never
count out. Yeah.
You know that you're going to get great matchups. I mean, Stillman Valley was just at the state championship game a couple years prior to this, and St. Joe Ogden wasn't that long removed from their previous state title game appearance either. So when you take a look at those things, you're going to get a great game, and that's exactly what we got here in 2013. And I mean, it was neck and neck the entire way. I mean, St. Joe scored first to take an early 7-0 lead. Stillman Valley answered 4 minutes later to tie it up, which would be the same score going in the second quarter. Right away in the second quarter, Stillman Valley took the lead 14-7, but the Spartans came down the field about 4 minutes later to tie it back up 14-14, and that was the halftime score. In the third quarter, St. Joe Ogden took the lead 20-14, but they failed on the extra point try. And then about 3 minutes later, Stillman took the lead back to 21-20. And about 4 more minutes after that, St. Joe scored again to take the lead 28-21 heading into the fourth quarter. That's where Stillman Valley tied it up. St. Joe would score again. Stillman tied it up with 1:19 to go to send the game into overtime. And in overtime, Stillman would take the lead 41-35. Coach Lawler called a 2-point conversion try. Hey, we're going to win it and get it done now or never. 2-point try succeeded. St. Joe came on their series. They scored. They failed on the 2-point try. Coach Lawler's gamble worked, and Stillman Valley won their 5th title. So, very exciting game. I remember this game very vividly as well. It was a great back-and-forth game. A lot of excitement, a lot of big plays. You're not going to be disappointed watching this game for sure.
For my second pick for 3A matchups, we're just going back to NIU last year for the Williamsville-BYRON matchup. BYRON was making their 2nd consecutive trip and 3rd overall, and Williamsville was making their 2nd trip in 6 seasons. So both teams, they've been there, and, obviously looking for that hardware.
Well, and both come out of very tough conferences, with Williamsville coming out of the Sangamo and BYRON coming out of the Big Northern. BYRON was largely a heavy favorite most of the year, despite that second week loss to Stillman Valley as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, if you want a good back and forth game, this is the matchup for you.
Yeah, this was phenomenal all the way through. Actually, I had to watch some clippets earlier today just to relive the moments and how everything transpired, because it was a very exciting game and backbreaker for BYRON, to say the least. But man, to watch Coach Coons and his team come through when everybody was up against them basically, because despite the records and the rankings, I mean, everybody had BYRON as a favorite in this game, and a lot of that had to ride on their experience, their athletic backfield. But Williamsville had a lot of great athletes themselves that were that came through in big moments, and the quarterback really shined in this game for them too, to say the least. But you know, Williamsville wanted to make a statement early, and they did, taking an early 7-0 lead just 3 minutes into the game. BYRON obviously responding about 3 minutes later to tie it up, and then another 3 minutes, Williamsville's back on the board again to take a 14-7 lead.
We sat up in the press box for this, and where we sat, you know, we're sitting between coaching staffs, right? I mean, just the back and forth. I mean, it was a fun game just to witness, just purely that. I mean, you know, the emotion, pure emotion.
Oh, yes. In the second quarter, obviously, BYRON came out. They tied it up at 14. A minute later, Williamsville's back on the board again, except this time they missed their extra point try, which left the door open for BYRON. BYRON did take that lead 21-20 about 2 minutes later. About 3 minutes after that, Williamsville's back in the end zone to take a 26-21 lead. And a little over a minute after that, BYRON's back in the end zone to take a 28-26 lead. But Williamsville said, not so fast. A minute later, they're back in the end zone again to take a 32-28 lead into halftime with them. In the third quarter, BYRON came out, took a 35-32 lead that would carry over to the fourth quarter. And then it took a while for these teams to get back going again. But with about 4:34 left in the game, BYRON took what many thought was the deciding lead that was going to determine the game. They're up 42-32, 4 minutes to go. Williamsville said, "Hold my beer, here we go." They scored.
No, it was not the root beer.
Root beer. They scored, 3:30 to go, 42-39, and then with 30 seconds left, the quarterback found the receiver in the back of the end zone as he made a sliding catch inbounds that sealed the deal for the Bullets to win their first state title in school history, 46-42. Very exciting game. Heartbreaking on one end, very exuberant on the other, and just watching the different emotions was what high school sports is about.
For my third pick for Class 3A, we're going to look at the 2014 matchup between the Wilmington Wildcats and the Williamsville Bullets. Both teams were 13-0 coming in. And if you want a game that does not pick up until like the final minutes, this matchup's for you.
You got that right. Obviously, Wilmington was making their second trip to state, where Williamsville was making their first trip to state. And as you said, you know, there wasn't a whole lot of scoring early on. Wilmington took a 3-0 lead in the second quarter with 1:17 left in the half, a lead that they would take into halftime with them. And in the third quarter, Williamsville would match that field goal to tie it up with 6:52 left in the third quarter. Williamsville would take a lead a little over a minute later, 10-3 after they scored a touchdown. But in the fourth quarter is where it got exciting. With about 6.5 minutes to go, Williamsville ties it up at 10. 16 seconds later, Wilmington returns the kickoff, 91 yards to take the lead, 17-10. A minute after that, Williamsville ties it back up at 17 all on a big play. And then as time expires, Wilmington kicks a field goal to win their first state championship in school history, sending Williamsville home and Wilmington the victor. But to come down to a field goal with time expiring, what a moment, what a game, just exciting game at that for how low scoring it was. I mean, it was awesome, just awesome. And quite frankly, this is definitely a game that I think a lot of you would want to watch, and a lot of our followers in the Sangamon area or even in the Wilmington area will want to watch as well.
Bonus points for not getting tongue-tied.
Thank you. All right, our fourth And final 3A game takes us back to 1996, where Carterville played Spring Valley Hall. Hall came in at 12-1, Carterville at 13-0, and Hall was the defending state champs in this game. I think they were seen as a heavy favorite in this game because of being the defending state champs. Carterville was making their first ever state title appearance game in school history. Obviously, this was Hall's second consecutive trip to state. And I think Carterville came out the gates ready to go to show that, hey, we're here to play for a state title and we don't care if you're the defending state champs. In the first quarter, they jumped out to a 7-0 lead with just under 5 minutes to go. That lead would carry over into the second quarter, where Carterville would extend that lead to 14-0 with 2 minutes to go before halftime. Hall was able to respond with a touchdown with 30 seconds left in the half to cut the deficit to 14-6. And then as we got into the second half, Hall started to come alive as they scored in the third quarter with 3 minutes to go to tie it up at 14. And then they scored right away in the fourth quarter to take the lead 20-14. With about 4 minutes to go, Hall decided that they would kneel the ball in the end zone to take the safety, which gave Carterville 2 points to cut their deficit 20-16. And a minute and a half later, Carterville made Hall pay for that decision by getting a touchdown to take a lead 23-20 that they would hold on to for their first state championship in state history, or in school history. And actually, to this point, it's the only time Carterville has made it to state. They have not returned since that time. So quite the magical season for Carterville in 1996. But this game is definitely a fun one to watch, one that you'll be excited to see the old turf back at ISU as well. And
it's crazy to think, obviously, by day and age, current, no one plays at ISU for football state. So
yeah, last game was in 1998 at old Hancock Stadium. It was 99. They shifted down to Champaign, and then in 2013 they introduced NIU to the mix. So there you have it. Anyway, great game to watch. Check it out.
All right, so here we are at 4A. Hopefully you guys have loaded up on your leftovers and you're ready for one last game to end the night. My first pick is the 2001 matchup between Addison Driscoll and Mount Carmel. Driscoll was making their second trip to state, and Mount Carmel was making their third trip to state. And a fun fact, in 2002, these teams met up again, and Addison Driscoll put the hurtin' on Mount Carmel 42-0. But why I picked this game? Another double overtime.
Yeah, I mean, this was the game that really put Addison Driscoll on the map. Obviously, they'd won a state title in 1992, but this was the first of what is still an unprecedented 7 straight state championship victories that the Highlanders had from 2001 to 2007. Obviously, the school closed after the 2008 season, but this game put Coach Rackey's name on the list. If you don't know who Coach Rackey is, he led Addison Driscoll for 4 years, and now is the head coach at Nazareth Academy, where he's led them to several state championships as well. Anyway, this game, like you said, exciting game. Addison Driscoll came in this game with an 11-2 mark. Mount Carmel came in with a 12-1 mark. And it really had a lot of back and forth in it. When you take a look at it, Mount Carmel scored first to take a 7-0 lead in the first quarter, late in the first quarter, that they carried over into the second quarter. Driscoll would kick a field goal shortly into the second quarter to cut that to a 7-3 lead in favor of Mount Carmel. But then the Aces would take a 14-3 lead with about just under 7 minutes to go. little over 3 minutes to go, and then Mount Carmel made it 21-10 with under 3 minutes to go. Driscoll scoring one more time to cut the lead, 21-18 going into the half. Mount Carmel with the lead. In the third quarter, Mount Carmel came out, took a 28-18 lead. Driscoll came back to make it 28-25 to enter the fourth quarter. And then with just 10 seconds to go in the game, Driscoll kicks a field goal to tie it at 28, all descending into overtime. In that first overtime, Mount Carmel would get the ball first. They would score to make it 35-28. Driscoll would respond on their next series to tie it up to go into a second overtime. In the second overtime, Driscoll would get the ball first. They scored, kicked the extra point to take the 42-35 lead. Mount Carmel scored to make it 42-41. Coach Peach decided to go for 2 to get the win in the state championship game rather than just kick the extra point and prolong a back-and-forth series. They missed a 2-point try, and Addison Driscoll walked out with their second state championship in school history. Mount Carmel went home as the runner-up, but what an exciting game it was. Obviously, the following year, like you stated, these two teams would meet up again in what was a overall shellacking in favor of Addison Driscoll, 42-0. But this game, was quite amazing. Obviously, Mount Carmel would get back to state again in 2011, but they still have not been this close to a state title, to an actual state title as they were in 2001. So a great contest nonetheless. Definitely one to watch as well.
Well, let's go back to 2017 for our second matchup. We're going to be looking at the game featuring the Rochester Rockets and the Morris Redskins. Again, 2017, up in NIU. Rochester was making their 7th trip to state in 8 seasons, and Morris is making their 11th trip to state.
Had a lot of great games in 2017.
Heck,
this
yeah.
is like the third one we've had from that time frame.
That was a great year.
It was a great year. Rochester and Morris, no strangers to state championship games. Obviously, Rochester is a bit newer, not making it to state until 2010 or 11. But really being there, it was 2010 was their first trip to state. Morris had 11 trips to state. They've been more known longer than Rochester, obviously more affiliated as a school a lot longer than Rochester has, but in recent years, Rochester is the creme de la creme, as you would say, of IHSA football. So here, making their 7th trip to state in 8 seasons, like you stated, this game was a true David versus Goliath moment, except it's one where Goliath still left with the advantage.
Oh, yeah, so not quite accurate, but you guys get it. But if you want another good, low scoring, just back and forth,
awesome game, this is that game.
This is for you guys.
So Rochester came out of the gate, scored early, 7-0, just over 2 minutes into the game, and Morris tied it up right at the end of the first quarter. In the second quarter, Rochester would take the lead 14-7 with a little under 3 minutes to go. That lead would hold true going into halftime. In the third quarter, Rochester would push their lead to 21-7 with 7 minutes to go in the quarter, and then Morris would answer to make it 21-14 with 2 minutes left in the third quarter. In the fourth quarter, Morris would tie it up with 4 minutes to go, and that score would hold until Rochester would kick a game-winning field goal as time expired to seal the deal for their 7th state title in 8 seasons, winning the game 24-21. Quite a game, quite an effort by Morris. I'm sure Redskin Nation felt that they had a good team. Probably thought that they were going up against, this huge giant, which they were. Rochester has been a big name throughout the decade of the 2010s, and man, this is one of those games, pure excitement. I didn't get to watch this one live because that was the year that they decided to go to NBC Sports Plus, and we didn't get to watch this game. We left the stadium early that year, but nonetheless, have been able to watch it since. Definitely recommend as a game to watch.
For my third and final pick, we're going to head over to the 2011 matchup between Rochester again and Richmond-Burton. Another great season for both teams. Rochester was making their second consecutive trip to state, and Richmond was making their second trip to state. So, I mean, both teams, no strangers. If you want another just good matchup, you know, back and forth, this one's for you too.
Yeah, I mean, it really, obviously Rochester was the defending state champs in this game. Richmond-Burton had lost the year before in the quarterfinals to Rock Island Alleman, who ended up advancing to the state finals and lost to Rochester. Rochester had a big name in quarterback Wes Lunt, who would later go on to play football for first Oklahoma and then transferred to Illinois. Which really started to bring Rochester to the forefront of the IHSA echelon, especially playing down in the Central State 8 in the Sangamon County area. But this game was awesome. It looked early like Rochester was going to run away with it, and Richmond-Burton made it a game. Right away, to open up the game, Rochester went up 7-0, just over a minute into the game. And about 4 minutes later, they scored again, take a 14-0 lead that they would carry into the second quarter. Richmond-Burton would cut into that deficit about 4 minutes into the second quarter and make it 14-7, where Rochester would capitalize once again to increase that lead halfway through the second quarter, 21-7. As time was running out at the end of the second quarter, Richmond-Burton would kick a field goal to make it 21-10 at the half. In the third quarter, Richmond-Burton would close that gap a little bit to 21-16, but then Rochester would score twice within about 20 seconds to take a commanding 35-16 lead. At that point, you know, you thought game, set, match. But lo and behold, Richmond-Burton kept fighting back. They made it 35-24 with 4:40 to go. Rochester would put up their last points on the board 13 seconds later on a kick return to make it 42-24. With about 11 seconds left in the third quarter, Richmond-Burton would score to make it 42-31. And then halfway through the fourth quarter, Richmond-Burton closed that gap to 42-39 to make for an exciting final 6 minutes of the game. However, Rochester would hold on to win their second straight state title. Quite impressive when you think about it. 2011, Rochester winning their second straight state title against Richmond-Burton. Fast forward to 2019, Rochester's winning their 8th state title in Class 5A, Richmond-Burton winning a state title in Class 4A. So, start of the decade, end of the decade type of thing. Pretty cool to see. Obviously, both programs, very strong programs. Like we said, Richmond-Burton's been around a long time. Rochester, fairly new. It's only been around in the 2000s, but both programs definitely very great. Rochester definitely has one of the hottest coaches across the country, and Coach Derek Leonard gets a lot of talks going around with what his next moves are, if they are to ever come, or if he's just content staying in Rochester. Either way, hell of a coach. Both programs, excellent programs. This game, a fun one to watch for sure. Our fourth and final Class 4A game takes us back to 1998 once again, where we had Chatham-Glenwood square off with Bishop-McNamara. Both these teams came in this game undefeated at 13-0. This was Glenwood's first ever state championship game appearance, where Bishop Mac was making their 7th title game appearance, but their first in the 1990s. A great game. Obviously, this was a time frame in 98 where Class 4A, if you saw a private school in a state championship game, they usually were the heavily favorites. Likewise, Bishop Mac was the heavy favorite in this game. Nobody really had heard of Glenwood that much. Their best season came just the year prior, where they lost to MCNAMARA in the quarterfinals 58-27. MCNAMARA eventually going on to the state championship game before getting a runner-up finish. But Glenwood comes in undefeated and relatively unfazed as they take on the Irish in this matchup. And right away in the first quarter, Bishop Mac takes that lead 7-0. But a minute and a half later, Glenwood would respond to tie it up at 7. And in the second quarter, about halfway through, they would take the lead 14-7. But Bishop Mac would come back to tie it up as time was winding down in the second quarter to make it a 14-all game as it went into halftime. In the third quarter, Glenwood came out, took the lead 21-14 with a little under 4 minutes to go in the third quarter. They would carry that lead into the fourth quarter, where Bishop Mac would tie the game up with just under 7 minutes to go in the game. And then with 3:05 left in the game, Glenwood would put the final points on the board to win the game, 28-21. But they had to hold on for that 3 minutes of fury to win that first state championship for Coach Rourke. To this time, it still is only state championship, but what a moment for Glenwood. They would eventually get back to a state championship game again in 2010. Unfortunately, they finished as runner-up that year, but exciting times for Glenwood, and when you take a look at what they've done throughout their time under Coach Rourke, very successful program, had a lot of bad luck running up against Catholic schools, private schools, being in Class 4A and 5A, and some very solid programs that they ran into. A lot of close games that they've lost in the quarterfinals as well. So it just speaks to, everybody talks about the public to private, and here's one where that public took advantage of everything they could against a heavily favored private school, and it paid off for them. And it was a hell of a season for Glenwood, and likewise, it was a very fun game to watch. I remember watching that game myself. So take a look, check it out. I'm sure some of you will enjoy watching that one over again.
So those were our picks for Class 1A through 4A, so hopefully bring some normalcy back to your Friday. Man, I don't know about you. Well, I know about you. And we're going to have an argument about this in a second, or a debate. Makes me so thankful that when the NUIC goes to state, it's usually a blowout. But again, we touched on that earlier when it comes to the hometown teams. I want to see them win. I want to see them win big.
Yeah, I mean, we've been blessed with some great championship teams over the years in our area. Obviously, we've had 20 of them, 21 of them now. Very exciting times, no doubt. Me personally, though, I like those tight games, those games that say, man, this is a true state championship game. It's one of the reasons why I love the 1 through 32 seeding, because I felt that seeding, more times than not, was able to get you the two best teams out of the bracket. Obviously, there's no perfect way of seeding. There's times where you're going to have the top two teams, like 1998. NEWMAN and GALENA met in the quarterfinals. No way around it. It happened. NEWMAN squeaked it out 17-14. But you still had a great state championship game because Milledgeville and Galena or Milledgeville and Carthage were still in that semifinal match. You got Newman and Carthage in that state championship game, and you saw a lot of that throughout the time frame of 96 to 2001. When they went away from that 1 through 32 placement, you know, now you started seeing more of the north-south alignment, and
I'm sure we could have argued that for 2018 at least, but we won't get into that anyway.
But you know, the close games are what makes it fun. It gets you up. It gives you that excitement, the exhilaration. I just feel that when you have that back and forth, you're watching greatness unfold in front of you, and it's going to be a moment that lasts forever. I mean, there's no greater moment than watching a game play out and seeing the emotions of everything that every player has put into their programs just come out at the final buzzer when you don't know who the champion is going to be. And on one side you see the positive emotions, on the other side you see the negative emotions, but likewise, that's where the purity of high school football comes about. That's what I get excited about. I love watching that happen. Unfortunately, we all know blowouts are a part of the game. They can be fun when you're on the winning side. When you're on the losing side, they're not so much fun. I've been on a couple of those myself, so it is what it is. But at the end of the day, you know, great state championship football is what we're after. That's what we presented with you for our game day slate.
And again, we want to see what you guys are picking. What is your mix and match? Drop them down below in the comment section. Post them on Facebook. Post them on Twitter. I mean, hopefully we're giving you those good edge of the seat games.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we want to see what you guys think on our selection of those games. Provide you with a bit of normalcy in these trying times. Obviously, COVID has run rampant for all of us. Most of us are probably tired of it, but at the same time, you know, we want everybody to stay safe, but we want everybody to have that bit of normalcy this holiday weekend. So
stay healthy, stay safe, stay sane, and hopefully, come spring, we'll be saying,
always root for the NUIC.